Hello and welcome back to Dukascopy TV. Geoffrey Hamilton from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe is with me in the studio just now. Geoffrey, welcome.
Nice to be here.
Now, Geoffrey, you are Chief of the Public-Private Partnership Programmes, I believe. Could you tell us a little bit about the UN Development Goals and how these programmes can play an important part in achieving these goals, please?
Well, the United Nations have what's called the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, and they set very clear targets which, broadly speaking, are to try and halve the rate of poverty by 2015. In next year, when these goals are going to be superseded by the Sustainable Development Goals, everyone's going to be having to look at improving access to essential services, to health, to education, to renewable water, to renewable energy. To achieve these goals, governments by themselves are not going to be able to do this. They will need the finance, the technology, the skills, the expertise that the private sector can provide. So public-private partnership is going to become quite an important model for the achievement of these specific UN goals.
Okay, I see. And perhaps you could tell us some examples of where these programmes have been implemented successfully.
Well, I remember I was recently in Manila, in the Philippines. I came across a very interesting project. It was a very simple, kind of straightforward management contract involving Fresenius, a big German company, and the National Dialysis Unit. And this technology was provided on a lease agreement by the German company to the Manila entity, and it delivered better quality care, comfort to the patients suffering from renal failure, and so much so that the person who was in charge of the project at that time, Enrique Ona, he then became Minister of Health, or Secretary of Health as they call it in the Philippines, and he initiated a very widespread program of public-private partnerships. So impressed was he in that specific project. Another project, much larger, was recently done in the health sector in Lesotho, Southern Africa. Excellent hospital built out of a very dilapidated health structure. A great shiny hospital in Africa, and it provides top quality care where previously it didn't exist. And we need to do much more of these types of projects all over the world.
Excellent. Now, you mentioned obviously the positive points there. A lack of information had been sort of pinpointed as holding some of these public-private partnerships back. But I understand you have the Care for Excellence and another whole programme which has been implemented to try and fill the gaps. Could you tell us a little bit more about that?
Precisely. I mean, you're absolutely right. Though the models I mentioned, the actual information is not existing. There doesn't exist the models, the precise details, the contracts, the financial arrangements. So if we're going to spread this best practice, we've got to know more about these models. And what we're doing in the International Centre of Excellence in Public-Private Partnership is to develop the standards that governments can follow. You see, when governments start public-private partnerships, particularly at the local level, they really effectively take a leap in the dark. This is completely new. So they really need some confidence that what they're getting into, there's some expectation of success. So we really need to develop templates, basic information for governments to go forward with this. We basically need to demystify public-private partnerships, and this is why the UN is going to develop these standards.
There was also a consensus that these public-private partnerships will play a critical role in the UN Development Agenda of 2015. What can you tell us about this moving forward, Geoffrey?
Well, absolutely. We've got to make progress. We've got to develop these standards. And I think a couple of things are important here. Implementation. It's not just developing these standards, it's making sure that they can be implementable. And one thing is very important here is sensitizing the business community. I was listening to a report a few days ago on the degree to which chief executive officers in infrastructure knew about the United Nations in infrastructure, and it's very disappointing. they don't know too much about the UN. So we've got to sensitize them about the UN development goals and trying to marshal sort of support for the development of these large infrastructure projects that are going to help. And to this end, we've established in the UN a business advisory board under the chairmanship of James Stewart, who was formerly with Partnerships UK, delivered a very successful programme there in the UK, and he's now chairman of our board now in KPMG. And that business advisory board is going to help with the implementation of these standards through a number of meetings. And I think that's very important, public, private, getting these things done as quickly, as effectively as possible. Yeah,
as you mentioned, demystifying does seem to be the important thing. Information is key.
And even democratizing, because I think public-private had been very much something to do with consultants, with financial institutions, and it was seen as being far too complicated for people, you know, normal people. We've got to get away from that if PPP is really going to make a difference.
Well, thank you so much, Geoffrey, for coming in today and helping us to understand it more clearly. It's been a pleasure to have you in the studio.
Not at all. Thank you.
Okay, well, that's all from Geoffrey and myself for the moment, but make sure you keep clicking back to Dukascopy TV for today's press review and many more exclusive interviews. Goodbye for now.